Everyone. I'm Belinda Gaskell. I'm the Director of Professional Development for IABC Asia Pacific. So it's great to be with you today. It was also a great pleasure to meet a number of you recently at Fusion, our Asia Pacific Communicators Conference, which was on in Melbourne, my hometown. It really was a world-class event, and I just wanted to shout out to the organisers and speakers today for all of their efforts. Really well done. The APAC board, just a quick follow-up to that, the APAC board are really keen to make that happen again next year. So, and to keep making those connections and knowledge sharing possible across our region for all of us. So as that planning progresses, we will keep you updated. I do have just a couple of quick IABC announcements to share today, and then we'll jump straight into the discussion. So the first one, October is membership month. And what that means is it's a great time to renew or join IABC. So there are both individual and corporate discounts on offer. If you've been thinking about it, now's a really great time to jump in. And the best way to find links to that information is via one of our social channels on Twitter. So look for IABC APAC on Twitter or find us on LinkedIn and Facebook. We've also just opened up entries for the 2019 Gold Quill Awards program. So if you've got a great piece of work you'd love to submit and have benchmarked against a global standard and the best of the best in comms activities happening around the world at the moment, then you can get started on your entry now. Those awards will be in Vancouver next June. So head to gq.iabc.com for details. So they're all the IABC updates for now. Let's jump into today. Today we're really privileged to have Katrina Andrews with us, and many of you will be familiar with Katrina and her company, Andrews Partnership, who are a leading recruitment and professional development firm in Asia Pacific. You might have seen from the bio, Katrina has quite an impressive career history. She was the first recruitment professional ever listed in PR Week's Global PowerBook 500 and established Andrews Partnership after 4 years as founder and board director of VMA Group Asia Pacific. Katrina's been a key figure in the growth of Asia's communications industry in recent years, and today she's going to share with us the insights she's drawn in those years as a leading recruiter for our profession. So I'm about to hand over to Katrina to speak. During the webinar, everyone will be on mute, but you can ask questions. There should be a question button on your screen, and Katrina will answer these at the end. So I'll hand over to you now, Katrina.
Great, thank you. And good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome. And as Linda kindly said, I'm obviously Katrina Andrews, managing partner of Andrews Partnership, and it's really great to be spending some time with you. First of all, I would really like to thank the IABC team, in particular, as I said, Belinda, but also Lisa McNally for making these webinars possible. I think they're really highly valuable and a great resource. So for the purpose of today, I'd really like to explore skills required to become a comms leader of the future and examine what's coming down the pipeline. What should we be thinking about now? Sorry, jumping ahead there, too excited. A very quick overview of Andrews Partnership. So as Belinda said, we focus on senior corporate communication and corporate affairs across APAC. Founded 3 years ago, I've been in Asia for 9 years, previously with VMA Group. And on the current slide, you can see the team, both Asia and the London business, and our more recent partner in North America. And here are just a few of the types of roles that we've successfully placed. So, to set the tone for today's webinar, I wanted to share a quote with you from fellow Aussie, Alicia Vincent, who's currently with Macquarie Group. And essentially what Alicia is describing, I think, sums up where we were as an industry and where we are now. And that obviously has a huge impact on our skills and what we need to consider for future career moves. So for today's session, let's delve into this by considering these 5 key areas. Firstly, is developing your media relations career still as bankable as we've always thought? Secondly, will the interest in integrated communication functions fundamentally change how we operate? Thirdly, what are the future trends and their impact on our skills that we need to think about now? And has the industry developed superb stakeholder skills, and who has? And then let's finish off with an area I'm personally really passionate about, which is beyond communications. Should we be taking handbrake career turns? And who are the trailblazers who are doing it? So the first of the 5 areas was media relations. And this slide demonstrates the cold, hard reality, which is cash, and how much is paid in relation to each discipline. So you can see that, yes, heads of media relations are paid more than heads of internal communications. No great surprise there. For us located in APAC, you'll be especially delighted to know that, in fact, for internal and external, we're paid more than our peers, either in Europe or in USA. So when we ask the question, is it still more bankable? Then yes, in direct comparison, it is. However, when we look at the entirety of someone's career, so the end goal of becoming either a head of communications or a head of corporate affairs or even a CMO, if you stay in the space of what a traditional media relations professional has been considered, then development beyond this point, so being promoted, is actually no longer guaranteed. And so what do we mean by traditional media relations professional? Well, even as recently as 2012, across APAC, heads of communications were still recruited down to their journalistic contacts. But that's now significantly changed for 2 reasons. Firstly, organisations drive to generate their own content. And secondly, media relations now needing to be more strategic in their external stories. So no longer is a story in the FT or Wall Street Journal considered great. It's more about how does that story link to the company's overall strategy. And when we look at the evolution of media relations, when companies first launch websites, there was always somewhere for the PR section with contact details and often pictures of who to call. Now for many, it's just a general number, no names, no out of hours number, and some, particularly European-based, even just has an email that sends out, "We will endeavour to respond to your query within 2 days." Whilst most CEOs still want to see coverage in respected outlets, traditional media is also competing with so-called influencers. A former comms director of a global drinks business once told me that they cared only for about 8 journalists, if that worldwide, but they cared about many more influencers. So again, media relations has had to develop. And unfortunately, when I've seen it go wrong, so when I've seen people lose their jobs as head of external communications or become stuck in those roles, is when they refuse to look beyond chasing journalists. Plus, as we all know, companies are trying to become publishers and they are generating their own content, which has a huge impact on the structure of teams. So that traditional sense of media relations is no longer a driver for career growth. Now, if we moved on to what an evolved sense of the role, what a large proportion of the market is actually hiring for. And Aisha de Cresta sums it up beautifully, that changing the mindset of how you use your media relations skills to become an internal investigator, being able to tell the business story to the media and employees is the new value of media relations. Companies still need to keep their media skills up to date in the event of a crisis, and that's not going to change. But if you want a senior communications role, you do need to have an idea of what organisations are now hiring for. A recent placement of ours, very high profile, APAC head, communications, organisation has approximately 90,000 employees globally, of which 20,000 are based in this region. It's a type of role that comes up no more than twice a year. And traditionally that role predecessors were straight media relations professionals. And the mandate from the global head of communication was that they wanted, and I quote, a more rounded professional. And I go on, one who had broader skills, both internally and strategically. The second story I wanted to share was another head of APAC communication who started their career as a journalist, and about 5 years ago said to me they could even find a head of internal comms who understood the business. Now, obviously at that point, I tried not to choke on my coffee. And as someone who was with Melcrum for 7 years, I argued all the strategic areas of internal comms. But fast forward, and that business got a new CEO, one who really understood the power of employees. And all of a sudden, structurally, and from a skill set, they had a very big catch up to do and radically change their hiring strategy. So the complete dominance of media relations of waning. Of course, there'll always be a need for it, but the drive for a rounded professional is growing. So now let's jump to our first poll. And it should be coming up on our screen just shortly, and I will give you some time to consider it. And it's social media is one of the main drive. That's our slide for the next one. That's okay. We will go on to the video and we will come back to it. Let's go into the video and we'll come back to that one. So our next video here, let's jump to it, which is from Paul Edwards, who spent 21 years with ANZ, 12 of those as Group General Manager Communications, and is now with CBA, and gives us his own personal account of the evolution and where to put your focus.
Hi, you asked me to talk about how changing C-suite priorities are also changing what CEOs are looking for in corporate affairs leadership roles. I don't often quote him, but Charles Darwin said, "It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one that's most responsive to change." I guess he was talking about dinosaurs, but the same really applies to us if you don't want to become one. I'm now working at Commonwealth Bank, but I was the head of corporate communications at ANZ for over a decade, having previously been head of media relations. During my 20-year career at ANZ, we had integrated communications, but to be honest, I devoted most of my time to external communication. It reflected the priority of the business, it reflected my background, and it served me pretty well. In the final couple of years at ANZ, though, that really changed dramatically. At one of my annual review meetings with ANZ's Chief Executive, Shane Elliott, I started presenting my plans for addressing the bank's external reputation. Shane listened patiently for a while and then said to me, "Paul, you know, that's important, but the real issue for me is the culture of the company. That's where I really need your help." It was a bit of an epiphany for me. Shane said that the pace and scale of change in technology, in the industry, and in society meant he was thinking seriously about the future of the business and its ability to adapt and to change. Shane isn't the only one. John Iwata, who's IBM's legendary Chief Communication Officer and a good friend, told me last year that he'd interviewed over 50 CEOs making big bets about disruption and the future of their companies. Every one of them said the biggest thing standing in the way of their business's ability to change and compete in the future was the culture of their companies. So my message is that these big shifts have put strategic employee communication, engagement and change communications which shape corporate culture to emphasise adaptability, authenticity and empathy really at the centre of the C-suite agenda. That ball's on the playing field, and as communicators we need to pick it up. For us, it means the centre of gravity in communications has shifted to have a much greater emphasis on internal communication and engagement. In my final year at ANZ, I actually spent about 75% of my time on internal comms and engagement. Let me give you a couple of examples. If you think about technology, to survive, large companies need to reimagine the way they work, to increase the pace at which they digitise, thinking much more like startups. The challenge here isn't mobilising financial resources, but the need to activate a new kind of culture and energy among employees. And if you think about the changes in society, companies from many persuasions, from tech giants to the largest banks, manufacturers and retailers, have all been slow to understand and adapt to the enormous shift in community expectations that have occurred in the past decade. The companies adapting most quickly to this environment are those rediscovering their broader purpose in society, embracing its authentic expression through their employees, and committing to a broader idea of stakeholder value creation rather than just shareholder value creation. It's not the only change going on. Disruption is also affecting us if you think about the growth of social and digital media. So my message is that evolution tells us we have to be responsive and lead these changes, because just doing a better job of the same old stuff won't help our careers survive in the future.
Great. Excellent. Thanks, Paul. I think the thoughts around digital and internal comms are really valuable here. We might try again with that poll if that's okay, Belinda. Let's see. There we go. Oh, no, it's still coming up to the integration one. That's okay. We will come back to that one at the end of this one. So we'll go on to integration. So secondly, let's now look at, will the interest in integrated communication functions fundamentally change how we operate? And we only need to look at a few recent crises, such as last year emission scandals at Volkswagen, which has been linked to a misalignment of culture, to see why CEOs care so much about this. Volkswagen, as we know, has been criticised with having a culture built on non-compliance to authority, one not based on adhering to regulations or where the right behaviours were rewarded internally. And that resulted in an external crisis, one of huge proportions. CEO fired, company fined 2.8 billion, and branded as criminals. So the demand for a sustainable culture and transparency is becoming more the norm. And examples of crisis like Volkswagen means leaders now see creating an internal culture as important as external announcements. And this is something that we are getting told over and over again. So it has absolutely led to the rise of internal communications, as we've just heard from Paul. I was in Australia in 2008 running Melcrum, as I mentioned, when the rise of internal comms really came to Australia. And then managed to be in Asia for when it hit here in 2011 as well. And even though that initial gold rush of heads of and appointments of functions has matured, what we're now seeing is this integration. So business leaders having really begun to see not just reputation as a competitive differentiator, but also internal culture. And additionally, this sense of blurring of the lines has also been led due to social media. So although a lot of structures in Australia will sit within specialist disciplines, in Asia, UK and Europe, this integration is very much on trend. So now let's go to our second video from Han Nguyen, who's led functions at IBM and more recently at GE, where the functions have been fully integrated.
Hi, my name is Han Nguyen, and it's great to join you in this conversation about the integration of the communications function. It's very much the future of the industry, so I'll focus on 3 tips that I hope can help communicators thrive in this environment. It's based on my experience working in large multinational organizations over 17 years in internal, external, and also leadership communication roles. So first up, all communicators will need to learn and master complexity and incorporate different perspectives of stakeholders into the communication strategy. What do I mean by this? Look at employees, for example. Not only will they look at the messages sent directly to them from a company, they'll also look and compare to the messages in the media, what's shared with business analysts, what's discussed by customers, and also by competitors. So communicators are going to have to work in an environment where the audience is not only connected, but they influence each other. So therefore, messages need to be transparent, consistent, timely, and simple. Second tip, learn and get savvy with the digital and social media trends that impact the way people receive and also engage with information. I started in a very traditional environment with text-heavy press releases and intranet articles. Those days are over. I've had to learn new skills in multimedia in order to effectively deliver messages to audiences. Increasingly, those messages need to be more humanized, and they need to be told by more people than just senior leadership and designated spokespeople. That brings me to my third tip. The internal comms and change management is going to be a critical skill for future leaders of the function. Consider this: employees are one of the most trusted sources of information about a company and organization, and they're also pivotal to ensuring that a business strategy is successful. So therefore, CEOs look for communication partners who can help them drive change within the organization and execute on strategy. So communicators who are able to influence employees and drive action are going to be successful with other audiences as well. So to wrap up, the integration of the function presents lots of great opportunities and growth areas for communicators. Good luck to everybody.
Great. Okay, let's jump to our second poll, which is around a CEO's view on the culture. So my CEO ranks culture as an important priority, And I'm just going to give everyone just 15 to 30 seconds just to answer that, and we'll come back. Okay, we might just look at that poll's results, if that's okay. Yeah, so 74%. I mean, these are things that obviously are no surprise to us. We certainly know, where the CEO takes his value, but it has put a very big emphasis now on internal communication. So really it will be interesting to see with that. So thirdly, let's now look at future trends and skills to develop. This slide was taken from the Holmes Report Global Comms study last year, and is focused on the USA and shows 13 trends affecting PR there. Please do take note of number 13. That personally made me laugh. The reason why I've picked a US study is that I find here in APAC, trends tend to trickle down to us either from the US or Europe as well. So it is important to look globally. I'm going to pick 3 areas to focus on that I'm hearing again and again from hiring managers and also candidates. And firstly, the first one, and as we know, there are many articles, events, conferences, you name it, about technology. And we can see here that digital storytelling, we can see AI, we can see virtual reality, live streaming, etc. Every comms person alive is being told you need to upskill in technology. And I can tell you, as an industry, we're playing catch up in this area. I would also say that role requirements now absolutely include digital communications. At first, this came out with people appointing dedicated digital professionals in their teams. And of course, this still happens. However, the evolution of digital skills now mean there is an expectation that each comms person has it, whether it's internal or external, CSR, etc. It's now built into job descriptions rather than considered a separate skill. We're seeing banks hiring people with programming or coding experience. In our areas of comms and corporate affairs, we're seeing tech journalists coming in-house and leveraging their tech expertise in IT comms roles. We're seeing organisations help their communication professionals on this journey to upskill by offering internal training, covering fields such as data visualization, AI, customer experience, data transformation, and even information strategy. I asked a real rising star about this, and he said that a good place to start would be focusing on data visualization, because understanding and representing data is a huge missed opportunity for the comms professionals, since it's really an industry that's never had a lot of data at its fingertips by nature, and now that's changing, which is also trend number 4 on the Holmes Report graph, big data. However, where to focus on technology development makes most people's heads spin. And yes, there is an argument to say senior comms professionals need to be up to date and able to lead digital transformation projects internally within businesses. But when I spoke to Matt O'Neill about this webinar today, who's a futurist based in the UK, he said that the real value of communications professionals was focusing on what we do best. And that as humans, we simply couldn't keep up. We can't compete with technology. So focus on what machines find difficult and what's innately human. So empathy, insights, creativity, and leadership. And frankly, from my experience, working across hundreds of organizations, take heart in the knowledge that we've never actually had a job brief asking for someone with experience in AI or visual reality. So although all these developments are important, pick one, perhaps as suggested the data visualization, and invest your time in that. Corporate purpose was also trend number 3. And many companies are now seeking ways to signal their purpose, the reason for being beyond profits. And interestingly, I was speaking to Helen Dunn, who runs CorpComms magazine in the UK and is a judge of their annual awards. And she told me that a common theme that judges kept coming back to when assessing communications programs was, how does this relate to the organisation's purpose? So as an industry, we are looking increasingly at campaigns or initiatives through that lens. We know that many times for companies, CSR initiatives were seen as bolted on rather than integral to the business. But companies are repraising these. In the past, there has been some crossover between CSR and charity initiatives. If I throw money at something, the company looks great. And that's going. Sponsorships, for example, are being cut back. The distinction is being made. Volunteering initiatives, however, are on the rise because staff like these, particularly those in local communities where a halo effect occurs. Really good companies, however, recognise that a strategic CSR strategy has real business impact. And this is also an area that comms professionals can flex your strategic input into the business and your CEO. Many years ago, Standard Chartered Bank told me that their safe sex and sex education initiative in Africa was important. The rise of HIV meant that staff were dying, customers were dying, communities were dying. There was a business imperative for Standard Chartered to act, but also in doing so, they were seen as a good corporate citizen and hence had a license to operate. So companies are looking for their business imperative, CSR programs. So financial services are looking at education. Drug companies are looking for partnerships in the developing world, etc. And this trend gaining momentum in the European and US markets. So if your organisation hasn't already taken corporate purpose seriously, here's your opportunity to act on it now. And finally, new narratives. So the word content was king last year. Every APAC head was talking about it. And actually, even on a recent roadshow throughout Switzerland, 6 out of 10 global heads of communications told us that developing their content capability would be their #1 priority. And why is this? Well, as we know, the rise of digital newsrooms, which allows major corporations to tell their story their way to stakeholders, is feeding some of this demand. They are keen to share stories, from the shop floor or, manufacturing plant that actually brings to life their business. But they also want content that they can work across multiple platforms and in different formats. So recognizing the short video may be appealing than, say, a lengthy article. So never before has the skill of writing or production of content been so important. However, after over 15 years in communications, I know that the simple fact is this: not everyone is a born writer. Staggering, I know. Why does being a comms person mean you're immediately J.K. Rowling? I talked to some functional heads about this and how they were tackling this sense of writing, and some are outsourcing their writing. We've recently also seen new hires come about, such as speechwriters and thought leadership directors, which then frees up a head of internal comms or head of external to focus more on the strategy. But this is a trend, and this year alone, we've seen a 33% rise in the number of positions for candidates which must have a strong background in writing. So from a skills perspective, you need to either develop this area or you need strategies for resourcing it. Mastering stakeholder management. And if there was one skill to develop, one thing that was bankable for your career advancement, it's mastering stakeholder management. You can be a great writer, you can be up to speed on digital, but if you cannot engage your key stakeholders, you're not going to get off the blocks. And again, when I've seen it go wrong, it's when there's a misalignment. And that can even start at the very beginning. For senior appointments, the average round of interviews is 13, which sounds a lot. And really, there's only 2 or 3 that are competency-based, and then it moves on to socialization, where essentially you're meeting all the key stakeholders. And the general rule of psychology is people are more willing to give you a go if they know you. So really, in the short term, it works in your favor, and long term. Getting stakeholder engagement right isn't an exact science, it's intangible. I've seen the good where people get roles because there's this connection with the CEO, which is great. The bad, people struggle in roles when their exco have lost faith in them. And the ugly, when people complain about their bosses who stay in their roles just simply because their CEO likes them. A senior PR agency person who moved in-house was approached directly for the role from the organisation and was told the CEO liked you and felt that he'd work well with you. The person reflected on this, and actually they knew the defining moment of when this relationship had developed. And it was when they were on a global conference call and the CEO was particularly displeased about an issue, and the phone went dead. Everyone went quiet. And they decided to speak up and actually really explain and step the CEO through what had got them to this point. Importantly, say, look, in relation to others, we're not in such bad shape. And then explain steps forward. We're going to jump onto our next video now, and Tim Cobb is going to speak about this. And one of the issues that plagues us in it is an industry's fear. Speak up more, because I can guarantee you, and I have a lot of conversations with people that do generally progress. And finally, if we want to see more women in leadership roles, one female communications managing director told me women tend to focus on managing their teams because by nature, we tend to be a bit more nurturing. And men tend to manage up very well. So if women want to get ahead, they need to be more focused on this rather than managing down. So let's now hear from Tim Cobb, who was Chief Communications Officer UBS Asia Pacific for 7 years before relocating to Switzerland and now London in a global role. He'll share his thoughts around the importance of speaking up.
I think to be successful senior stakeholder manager from a communications perspective consists of several things. One is having a seat at the table, getting in early, being part of the discussion from the beginning, and providing views that are not necessarily the prevailing view, but countering views, looking at playing devil's advocate, for instance, looking at investors versus employees, internal versus external. Messages may not be consistently received the same way depending on the recipient and who the audience is. So being able to provide that, I think, really positions you well to be seen as a trusted advisor. And that's what they're looking for, someone that can be part of the team, the communications expert, and a trusted advisor. There's several scenarios where it's not as easy. For instance, if you have a co-CEO or co-president arrangement, you're in constant negotiations between the two to come up with an aligned, joined up message that makes sense, that looks like everybody's on the same page. So in that situation, your negotiation skills and political skills will come to fore. Another one is the, let's say, reluctant CEO or senior stakeholder, somebody who maybe doesn't prioritize communications as much as he or she should, and is reluctant. And it might be that they need training. Maybe it's as simple as doing some media and presentation skills training for that person to make them feel more comfortable. Or what I've done in the past too is doing a benchmark analysis of peers in the industry to look at what others from the competitors, that person in that position is doing across the industry and across regions. You may see who's speaking at conferences, what are they saying, what are the messages, how often are they in the paper, and you benchmark that against your stakeholder, and it'll become pretty clear that where the communication strategy needs to go. It will provide a good guide. So that's it for me, and have a great webinar. Thank you very much.
Okay, and now let's jump to Michael Hanratter, who's had a long career in a fairly structured business environment, such as IAG, DuPont, and Citigroup, before jumping into the fintech space. His comments in this video are really relevant because when he moved into the fintech space, he had to radically change his approach to stakeholder management. And it's a real lesson to all of us to be adaptable.
Stakeholder management is a critical yet frequently overlooked communication skill. The process for developing communications and messaging can be as important as what you ultimately say. For me, it's a bit like developing a menu for a dinner party. Sure, you could just trust your palate, go with your favorite foods, and prepare it just the way you like it. But what if somebody has a food allergy? Maybe someone else is a vegetarian or a vegan. Maybe another person has started a strict diet. Now, I'm not suggesting good communications, are only done with dozens of cooks in the kitchen. But I've learned that by being curious about the perspectives and the needs of other stakeholders, and then engaging with them throughout the process, that's a much better recipe for developing compelling, versatile, and effective communications.
Okay, and finally, the fifth point on this webinar is beyond communications, and this is an area that absolutely fascinates me, I've got to say. And I've made it a big part of our firm's focus for the past 3 years. And we've actually produced a research study called Pathways, which is on our website. And it's because of one thing, and I'm sure many of us have noticed, is how linear communicators' careers are. If you start out at finance, you see people advance to a CEO. If you start out at marketing, they progress either to a CMO or maybe a business strategy role. But once you've reached the upper echelons of communications, so once you've got that top comms job, there's this feeling that there's only lateral moves left. And actually, as an industry, we are interested in beyond communications. We conducted a survey for this Pathways report, and to senior communications professionals across APAC and particularly in Asia. And 85% of them said that yes, they would be interested in making a move outside of communication, which is a pretty high percentile. In this survey, we further asked them where they would aspire to move to as their next step. And group roles still came out as number one, so global opportunities. And quite a few were also willing to relocate for these, which means international moves to, say, Europe or USA. But chief of staff also came out very popular. And then interestingly, and trailing afterwards, were non-executive directors, COOs, and CEOs at only 17%. My personal thoughts on the ranking being so low for CEOs was that perhaps it's due to the fact that there are just so few examples of communicators making it to the top, that the aspiration around this opportunity doesn't feel realistic rather than it being a lack of interest. So before we jump in and explore some of the trailblazers, let's have our third poll, which is I'm interested in considering roles beyond corporate communications. Let's see how many of you are and what areas you would be interested in. So we can see there you've either got chief of staff or COO or simply no, I really want to stay within comms. So let's see, I'm going to give you say 15, 20 seconds and we can chat further about that. Okay, great. We might jump to the results. Thank you. Yeah, chief of staff. Okay, interesting. So 45. So for those people in the 32% who said that no, they were interested in staying in, do look at the pathway study, because what you might be interested in seeing is actually that 85% on the group roles. So how do you use some of these tools that for making this transition and stepping into a global role? And for everybody else, let's start looking. So for those of you who looked at CO and COO and chief of staff, so we can see that, as I said, so chief of staff at 52%. And personally, I can absolutely say this type of role has come up time and time again in discussions with communication professionals. And it's certainly becoming an interesting avenue. Joanne Tan at HP is an example of someone moving from comms into this role. In total, she spent 17 years as a communications professional, and it was after 11 years at HP she moved. What was the catalyst and what prompted her to make this move? Simply, she felt she'd stopped learning, but still really liked the organisation. Although time for a change, Joanne had no idea what that. The role change idea came from sharing her frustration and sense of stagnation with the regional MD. that behind the scenes, he went out of his way to create an entirely new role, HP Asia's first ever Chief of Staff. So although for many of us, telling the top leadership that we're dissatisfied might be seen as a fast track to losing your job, if done in the right way to the right people, it can stimulate ideas from people who have an objective view. And how did she make this transition, and what were the skills transferable? Well, Joanne felt that her communications networking experience was an immediate benefit for the role. That being the bridge between different parts of a very matrix organisation is a core competency for Chief of Staff. The need for growth did come in the form of sharpening her project management skills, as the role is effectively a very delicate balance of the MD's big vision to ensuring even the smallest details are correct. Now, Joanne isn't the only one to make these types of business leadership transitions. We can also look at CEOs. And as mentioned, unfortunately, there are a few successful examples of this, but someone who has made the leap is John Fallon, who's CEO at Pearson's, the only FTSE 100 business with a CEO who came directly from corporate affairs. He said of making it to the CEO position that he had to take a lot of risk. In fact, he went from having the fantastic corner office with direct access to the CEO to moving into a loss-making business and losing his seat at the executive committee. It actually took him 5 years to get that seat back. In his experience, he felt that through his conversations, many communicators wouldn't be comfortable taking that risk. And personally, I absolutely agree. As mentioned earlier, as an industry, we tend to like to stay in our lane. And there's a real fear that if we try something new, we'll fail. So perhaps the next example might be a safer bet for people, which was the COO move, which Phil Wilson-Brown, after 12 years leading external communications with RSA Insurance, was given the shot to expand his remit, so expand his external comms to include strategy, which then led to bigger opportunities. He credits making these moves down to executive sponsorship. Through his work on a particularly big crisis at RSA, he was able to forge a strong relationship with the then CEO, who went on to become his champion. These are just 3 examples. In total, we looked at 8 professionals. And really, as an industry, I couldn't encourage people more to strive to take some risks, ask for more, and speak up. And to conclude, I would love to hear your thoughts on these topics. And of course, ideas on how as an industry we can continue to develop. I wanted to say a big thank you again to IABC, particularly Lisa and Belinda, I apologise. It's a fantastic, extremely important association for our industry. And whatever you decide is the right career path for you, it's important to remember it's a journey. And I wanted to share the following quote that was told to me by an executive, and it's always stuck with me, which is, every time you move roles, you bring everything with you. That's the great thing about a career, it builds. The slate doesn't wipe clean with each move, it just gets richer and more detailed. So the idea of change should never stop you, it should actually drive you on. So thank you. I hope today was relevant and useful. And I look forward to watching many of your careers grow and develop. And I wish you every success. I might jump to some questions now, if there's any questions in summary for any parts of it. Just give everyone just a few seconds for the questions.
And it's Belinda here, everyone. So there's a couple of ways you can pop your questions in. Hopefully you can see the Q&A button, which should be on your lower end of the screen, I believe. There's also the chat box. So a couple of options there. Great opportunity while we have Katrina here. Please pop those questions in. She's happy to answer them.
So one of the questions here that I've got is around what's happening in the market at the moment. And I think that's probably the commonly asked question that I get. And actually, obviously I'm really speaking from across APAC, but really with a strong focus on Asia. And from a senior perspective, the market's actually very strong, which is great. And I think what we're seeing is people, having more confidence. So there's a lot more senior hires and people actually committing to the process. In the last 2 years, there's been a lot of conversations about making hires, and there's certainly been replacements. But this is the first year that we're seeing people actually commit to those hires. The process is still long. I mentioned earlier before that there's 13 rounds, and that's still very much the case. But the market is actually quite strong, probably the strongest of the last 3 years. So another question here is what is, some of the big trends that we see coming out? And I mean, for me, it really comes back to, the three that I mentioned. So around corporate purpose, technology, but also writing. I know writing is something that we've all discussed until the cows come home. I know that's the same as technology as well, but, this sense of integration as well. I was asked about it, and when I asked people over the last 18 months what their concerns were, or what were the challenges for their team, or what were they having to invest a lot of their time in, it was all around integration and then content and building the capability internally around that. So the next one was any tips or advice for comms people looking to get experience in Asia. And I think, I've been here 9 years, as I said, and 2 of those is in Hong Kong. And the market has developed since then. If you're looking to relocate here, I think it's a great opportunity, but it is a really competitive market here. There's and has been a real drive for local talent to develop. And of course, you've also got people who have moved here as well. So it is quite competitive. I think, frankly, where the easiest points of access to move into the region is internal communications. There is still a lack of internal comm specialists here. So if that's an area you can certainly, if that's an area of specialty for you, you can certainly use that to make a move over here. I mean, of course, the more senior you become, the harder the move into the region is, simply because there's quite a few people already here. The other question was, as millennials and Gen X's are much better, or Gen Y, sorry, are much better in social media, do I feel that Gen X's and boomers are able to still be successful in these roles? And absolutely. And I think, as I said, take heart in the knowledge that, we're not seeing job descriptions come through saying you need to have visual, VI, or you need to have AI, or VR, visual reality skills. The technology isn't that demanding. I think you need to have a very good understanding of it. But ultimately, if you are still very good at strategy, if you are still very good at stakeholder management, and as long as you have a strong understanding of these other areas, but also messages, that in the sense of the new narrative, how organizations now are trying to communicate who they are, and how they use that content, because now they are less reliant, as I said, on the traditional media outlets, and are becoming self-publishers. So having a really strong understanding of how content can be used and how the stories can be delivered, whether to internal or external through these channels, I think still overweighs technology. Will that be this way 5-10 years time? I'm not sure, but I think at this stage it certainly still does. Sorry, I'm just getting quite a lot of questions through, so I'm just reading them to read them out. So I think there's lots of questions coming through actually around an ROI of your communication that you're doing, and how do you, I'm paraphrasing about 2 or 3 questions here, and how do you use measurement tools to your CEO? And again, somebody who worked at Melcrum for many years, and we looked at all sorts of measurement tools for internal comms. I, under Andrew's partnership and certainly at VMA, have a strong emphasis both on internal but very much on external now. So looking also into public affairs and investor relations. And apart from investor relations, but for communications, measurement for this industry is still a huge issue, and one I don't think we've particularly nailed. As I said around stakeholder management skills, it is intangible. So I think just trying to use some of the tools that are available to us. I think, people get sick of hearing about measurements, but just keep looking at the new tools. I mean, obviously from the internal comm side, you've still got people like Angela Sinicus producing a lot. I firmly still believe that people still care about awards. Perhaps they say they don't as much, perhaps when they don't win, but I would really still be looking at awards that you can win and putting your communication programs in there. Obviously for IABC, the Gold Quill is a great resource for your career. Getting listed on things like, PR Power Book 500s, it's important. And, they have something, the top 30 under 30 that PR Week produce. Those kind of industry acknowledgements is still really important. So I think it's worth investing the time and sticking your hand up and saying, actually, we're doing a great program. Let's throw our hat into the ring and try and get some industry recognition for that. I think the other one was, is there other certain industries that are leading the way in some of this stuff? And I think obviously from a technology standpoint, that's pretty clear, right? In terms of the people that are working in less regulated environments. I would say that from a financial services perspective, there is a lot of movement in this area. They are obviously, any kind of regulated environment has different stringent areas that they need to work through. But I would say that there's a lot of movement on financial services communication, and there's a lot of people talking about it. So I do see more innovation certainly coming out of this, and particularly anybody who's got a retail bank obviously can do a lot more of that. I'm thinking more strictly even from investment banking or private banks, etc. But in saying that, I do think financial services is playing catch up, but they are really starting to have a lot more conversations and being aware that they need to be doing and are thinking for ways around this. Okay, great. I think that we might wrap up on those questions. Again, thank you all so much for people for sending and for participating. I have really enjoyed, being able to share these views. You can see on there, obviously, our website. Do feel free to go on and download the Pathways study if you are interested in looking at careers beyond straight communications. If you want to consider roles that are based in Asia, the best way to do that is to follow us on LinkedIn under our Andrews Partnership site, or page, sorry, I should say. We do put quite a few roles up there. And of course, there's my email address as well if you would like to reach out. But a big thank you again to Belinda and Lisa. They have lots to do themselves, and they really are great to do IABC on top of everything. So Belinda, I might pass back to you.
Thanks, Katrina. On behalf of everyone who's joined us today, and for those who get to listen to the replay, really would like to thank you again for sharing those insights. It really was a privilege to have both you and all of your guests that you brought to us via the videos today. So as I mentioned earlier, we did record the presentation today, and we'll make that available to everyone who was registered. And of course, we'd like your feedback on today's session and on future sessions you might like us to organise. We know how important these webinars are for our profession across the region, and particularly for those members at large that may not be near a big sort of city where there's other professional development. So please let us know what would be of interest. And as I said earlier, don't forget to follow IABC Asia Pacific on our social channels. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn and Facebook, and that's where you'll find all of the updates on our upcoming events. And we do hope to have a couple more of these before the end of the year, and we'll bring the details of those to you soon. So I will wrap up there, and thanks again everyone. Thank you, Katrina. We appreciate your time, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Great, thank you.